Patrick.
What's that? Continuous film?
It's about a 30-minute film.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We're here with Papa Jim. It's on December 6th, 1997. We're just going to ask some questions about your life. And one of the first questions is, what was your favorite pastime as a child growing up?
I had a very unusual life in Newfoundland as a boy. The seasons were fantastic for me. Number one, spring of the year, getting ready for trout fishing. Wintertime, ice skating, which I did a lot of. Every season had something special in Newfoundland. As a boy, it was like, in the fall of the year, I hunted rabbits.
Uh-huh.
In the spring of the year, I fished for trout in the streams.
Uh-huh.
In the summertime, I did the same. I also rounded up cattle, milk cows, etc., etc. Now, those are the things you want to know, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Were the winters real hard?
The winters were frightening. We were right on the ocean,
Uh-huh.
facing the broad Atlantic, opposite where the Titanic went down, by the way, incidentally.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't make too much difference but you'd like to know it.
Sure. Oh, yes. Okay.
Anyway, the temperature would get down as low as 15 or 20 below zero, but it was worse. It was the wind and the storms and the frightening rains and breeze and frozen ice. In other words,
Were you able to go out in the?
oh yeah, had
or
to.
you had to. You
You
had to
had
go
to.
to school to work.
As a matter of fact, you had to.
Yeah.
You spent, as a boy, I spent the weekends helping my father cut wood to keep a fire going.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't afford coal. We didn't have gas.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have electricity. Our home was without running water.
Mm-hmm.
It was without electricity at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to provide for everything ourselves.
Were your bathrooms outside the house? Or
Everything was outside the house.
everything
Yeah.
outside.
Yeah.
How far from the home to the
we-
outhouse?
We had a barn.
or
We had a barn where it housed a lot of cattle,
Uh-huh.
and there was an outhouse right near the barn.
Mm-hmm.
That's not. It wasn't too far.
Yeah. Now, the home that you lived in, was it the same home from the time of your birth till when you left?
The home I lived in was my father's original home
Mm-hmm.
that he built himself,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the home my father had two marriages. His first marriage, he had 4 children,
Mm-hmm.
and
What
then
were their names?
well, my oldest one was Michael,
Uh-huh.
William,
Mm-hmm.
and Mary. And then a baby who died at childbirth, they had him christened, his name was John.
Mm-hmm.
Then he met my mother and married my mother, and she gave birth to 6, and I was the eldest one of the 6.
And your brothers and sisters' names?
Sisters and brothers, you want that?
Uh-huh.
My oldest sister was Winifred.
Mm-hmm.
Next sister was Elizabeth. Next sister was Veronica. Then two brothers, Augustine and Patrick.
And how many rooms were in your house
Well,
that you grew up in?
not too many rooms, but anyway, there were 4 rooms upstairs, 4 bedrooms upstairs,
Mm-hmm.
and they were used by 2 and 3 to a room, depending upon the size of the family.
Mm-hmm.
Downstairs there was a large area, living room, kitchen, dining area, a sort of a restroom or a library room,
Mm-hmm.
we'd call it.
And then you said that it was your father's second marriage. His first wife, did she pass away? or-
My father's first marriage had 4 children. I gave you
Yes.
that already,
Uh-huh.
but she died, and a baby died at childbirth.
Oh,
And-
okay.
And they died. The mother died, and the baby died. Baby lived a few weeks or a few months after she died,
Mm-hmm.
based on the information I received.
Yes. What did your father do for work?
My father, as well as all of his forebears, were fishermen.
Fisherman. Uh-huh.
Yes,
What type of fishing?
cod fishing especially.
Mm-hmm. Did he have his own boat that he went out
Yeah,
on?
my father and his brothers had a large boat,
Uh-huh.
a small schooner, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and they fished that was summertime only. In the wintertime, they spent many days making nets for the following year, following spring, and most of the young people worked on making nets. Do you follow?
That was some of your chores that you would do?
That was some of the chores, other than preparing wood for the fireplace, etc.
Because you had to keep it going.
Keep it going.
The whole time.
That's right.
And would y'all chop your own wood down?
Oh yeah, we spent half our lifetime in the woods cutting wood and preparing wood. Number one, we'd cut down trees in the spring of the year and let them dry, so we'd have kindling in the fall of the year.
And you'd saw them into sections
Saw
and
them
then split
saw them into wood burning fire, chunks of wood.
And then split them.
And split them. That's correct.
What was a typical day for your mother?
Oh, a typical day for my mother was typical, all right. Cooking, baking, sewing. From early morning to late night, she spent her entire life preparing food and taking care of children. After all is said and done, it was a large family.
Oh, very large. Yes.
Yes. And then after my mother raised her 6 children, and when the youngest one was about 10, 12 years old, a teacher in the village passed away, was on her deathbed, sent for my mother to take the baby. She was dying at childbirth. My mother took that baby on a temporary basis, but kept him till he grew to be a man.
Really?
Yeah.
And how old were you when she took the baby in?
Oh, I was away from home.
Oh, you were already away from home.
I was already in the United States.
You were already okay.
Yes. First time I saw him was 8 or 9 years later, when I went back to visit.
What was, describe your grandparents' houses, and did you visit them often?
No, I had never visited. I knew one grandparent only, my mother's mother. She came and spent many winters with us. She was a marvelous woman. She used to spin yarn. She spent days and days in our home, taking care of the wool that we shaved from the sheep in the spring of the year, and it was washed and molded and carded into rolls, and my grandmother would spin it on a spinning wheel. I don't know whether you followed that or not.
Yeah.
To make yarn.
To make yarn.
Yes, and she made the yarn. Now that was the only grandparent I ever knew. My father's father and mother died young. Now I knew my grandfather's second wife only, and I knew her, and in the old lovely home that my grandfather built, I knew the home quite well. It was unusual. Peg floors. It was an unusual home. Wood-burning fireplaces in every room. He was a fantastic builder, in my opinion, without any training. All of his knowledge came from what he learned by himself. Okay.
Did most of the people in the village, did they build their own homes?
99% of the people in the village built their own homes.
Would they go help each other?
They helped each other, yes. At times, in case of an accident, they would all chip in and...
Now, can you list one special memory about each of your brothers and sisters?
Do I have special memory?
Yeah, can you list like one special memory? Does a particular memory stick in your mind from each of your brothers and sisters?
Yes, especially my oldest brother, Michael. I remember him distinctly when World War I started. He was 18 years old, and my father suggested to him that he should volunteer to fight for England, which was contrary to our forebears, because they were all Irish. But instead, my father said, "You're living in a British country. Newfoundland was a British colony. He said, you're not living in Ireland, so you fight." That will never be erased from my mind. And my father suggested to him that he go into town and volunteer, which he did. And he went overseas and spent 4 years in France, in England, etc., and survived and came home.
Now, he was older than you? Or?
He was the eldest one of the entire family.
He was of the original four children?
Yes.
Yes. What about some of your other brothers and sisters? And
I remember all of my brothers and sisters. I remember them distinctly, of course.
Any other special memories that stick in your mind?
Yes, to a degree. That I can remember, naturally, my older sister, Winifred, a marvelous girl, she's a marvelous woman. She has a daughter that I still visit. Her only daughter, it was Del, you know, you've met Del
Yes.
Rosa.
Uh-huh.
I remember all my family, and in many ways, I helped bring several of them to the United States.
Yes.
I buried one brother in Oklahoma City.
Mm-hmm.
I buried one sister here in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the things that is part of your story, I guess.
Yes. Uh-huh. What are some of the most important lessons that you have learned in life?
Well, Kevin, I don't know where to start from there.
I know these are hard questions.
No, that's real. What is the most important thing I've learned?
Mm-hmm.
Number one, ambition was part of my makeup.
Something your father instilled in you?
Yes, my father was a marvelous person when it comes to helping a child, teach a child. My father was real good. He didn't have a lot of education. He could read and write, but he was a fabulous teacher in a way, of honesty, integrity, etc. And when I left home to come to the United States, his last remark to me was, "Whatever you do, do it right.
Mm-hmm.
Don't take a chance on causing any friction, so to speak, or problems."
Were you the first member of your family to come to the United States?
No, Mike was in the United States.
Mike came first?
Mike came first, but that was not my responsibility. My responsibility was my own.
Yes.
I was determined to leave after I taught school one year in Newfoundland before I left. I taught to pay back a student loan.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a student loan that we know here in the United States. It was a grant from the government.
Mm-hmm.
All the schools in Newfoundland were parochial, Protestant and Catholic alike.
Mm-hmm.
All the schools were controlled by the government.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to be a teacher, you had to, if you wanted to go away to become a teacher, you had to have a grant from the government, and you had to teach 1 year to pay back that loan or grant, so to speak.
What age students were you teaching?
Well, I had an unusual year. In a small frame building about 2 miles from where I was born, I had 50-some children, 51 or 2 children, from kindergarten to a 4th grade.
Mm-hmm. How far did you have to go when you were a child going to school? How far did you have to go to get to your school?
To get to school?
Uh-huh. And how did you get there?
Walking.
Walking.
And sometimes you may catch a ride on a horse and sled in the wintertime.
And was it, how far away was it?
About 1.25 miles.
Mile and a quarter. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any pets growing up?
Pets?
Uh-huh.
Well, you had a stable full of animals.
Uh-huh. Any dogs or cats?
No, we had cats, but no dogs. No, we couldn't afford dogs. It would cost to feed them.
Yeah. What were the cats? Did you have a favorite cat?
Well, yes. There was one of my sisters had a favorite cat.
What was its name? Do you recall?
Well, I recall her very well, Elizabeth. And we used to kid her a lot about her cat. That cat used to follow her to school, as a matter of fact.
Mm-hmm.
We had a hard time keeping the cat from going to school with her.
Kind of like Mary had a little lamb. How
yeah,
the
Mary
lamb
had a little
followed
lamb.
her to
That's
school.
right. That's right.
Yeah. What was your favorite meal as a child growing up, and why?
Anything you could. Not anything. We had we had a pantry full of food.
Uh-huh.
My parents were fabulous providers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I could say that any other way.
Was it mainly fish that you would eat?
No. My father would sell his share of the crop of fish. He and his brothers would divide the year's work, fishing.
Mm-hmm.
And in good times, there were good times. money-wise.
Mhm.
Based, not millionaires, not millions, but hundreds.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they sold off the fish they caught that year, they would go right straight to the same merchants in the city of St. John's and buy barrels of food.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't buy pounds. Everything was barrels.
Mm-hmm.
Barrels of flour, barrels of pork, barrels of beef,
Mm-hmm.
barrels of sugar, barrels of molasses.
Was the beef and the pork, was it cured to where
Oh, yeah,
salt cured? It
Oh.
it wasn't fresh.
No,
Where
no.
Nothing was fresh.
The only fresh we had, we killed it ourselves.
The deer and the rabbits and.
Well, in the spring of the year, we had lambs,
Mm-hmm.
and that was fresh meat.
Mm-hmm.
In the wintertime, and every once in a while, we had a young cow, a young animal we would kill ourselves. So we'd have fresh meat for a time being, as long as the weather would last. We had no other means. The only means we had to depend upon the elements.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Uh-huh. So they'd come back with the barrels full of all the foods, and they'd divide them up between the four of them.
No.
Or-
Let me try to say it one way only. Let's assume they had 50,000 pounds of codfish. It was sold, and they divide the money
Okay.
between the four brothers. And if they had somebody working for them, they had to pay the man who worked for them
Mm-hmm.
for that season. And then let's assume my father had $500 for his share.
Mm-hmm.
He spent possibly 400 of it buying food immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And we always had a pantry full of food.
Yeah.
We were able to supply a few of the neighbors who were less
Less fortunate.
fortunate.
Uh-huh. With the boat that your father and brothers had, what was it? A powered boat?
I lived in Newfoundland to see the first power to go into any kind of a boat.
Uh-huh.
When I was a youngster growing up first in Newfoundland, my father and his brothers sailed.
They would sail out to where
Sail and row.
in row. Uh-huh.
Yeah. But I saw the first motor go into a boat in the seacoast town where I was born.
Mm-hmm. And
In other words, 99% of the people who lived there rowed boats.
rowed boats. Uh-huh.
Yes, or sailed them.
Wow. What chores did you have to do when you were growing up? We talked earlier. You did some of the making of the nets, but what were some of the other chores you did?
Cutting
And the wood.
cutting firewood was principally the and in the spring and there were seasons when we had berries, and we'd go picking berries.
Uh-huh.
And as youngsters, we sold berries.
Soul berries. Uh-huh.
Yeah, we'd make a few pennies for ourselves.
I guess that'd be like Tim and myself collecting soda pop bottles.
That's right.
And turning them in.
Berries, it was fantastic. The countryside grew all kinds of berries, raspberries, strawberries, all wild. Partridge berries, cranberries, all grew wild. And we picked them at certain seasons.
Mm-hmm.
In the summer, in the early spring, there was one kind of berry. In the summertime, there was another kind of berry. In the fall of the year, another kind of berry, depending upon the seasons. It was amazing, really. And we lived off the land.
Lived off the land, yes.
Oh, yes. Rabbits, partridge.
When you went to school,
I went.
you went grades. You started at what age going to school? Probably 5 years old, or.
I guess so, yes.
And then did they have like elementary school and then high school?
I stayed in. I went to school in Pooch Cove
Uh-huh.
until it was time to go to high school.
Uh-huh.
And then I got a grant from the government, and I went away to a boarding school.
Mm-hmm.
I was taught by the Irish Christian Brothers
Mm-hmm.
for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'd come home for Christmas. The government paid for everything.
What ages were you away?
I was away from 13 to 17.
Year round or just during a
Oh,
school
during the seasons.
during the season?
Fall, go get to school in September
Uh-huh.
and come home for Christmas.
Come home for Christmas.
Then come back home maybe for Easter.
Uh-huh.
Then come home in June for the summertime.
For the summer.
Mhm.
When you were in high school, did you have any?
That was it. That was the high school.
Yes. Did you have any extracurricular activities that you did? Any sports?
Yes.
Or
Oh yes. Ice skating.
ice skating?
Principally.
Mm-hmm.
Football.
Mm-hmm.
That was not. Now, football and American soccer. It was what.
What you all call football was what we would call soccer.
Well, no, we had soccer.
Okay.
Kicking it.
Kicking it.
Yes,
Yes.
that was soccer.
Uh-huh.
That was a British name for it.
Yes.
And we were living in a British country, as you
Yes.
understand, Newfoundland.
So a lot of soccer.
It was soccer, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Ice skating in the wintertime and soccer in the spring and summertime.
Mm-hmm.
That was it.
That sounds fun.
Except when you were working to make a living and help your family.
Yeah.
90% of our time was taken up doing chores for
Doing
our...
chores. Yes. A lot harder times back.
We didn't...
But what you didn't know, I mean, it was just your daily routine.
Daily routine, that's right.
Do you remember any crazy fads that you did when you were in high school? Any crazy-
No. When I was in high school, I was in an Irish Christian Brother boarding school, St. Bonaventure's. That was one of the most fabulous experiences of my life. They were fabulous teachers, and I was there for almost 3 years.
Mhm.
And I received a high school education and a year junior college.
Mhm.
And then I had to have that much education in order to teach 1 year.
Yes. Do you, when you were a child, do you remember any mischievous childhood experiences?
Oh yeah, a little bit.
Do you have one that you can?
There was nothing very serious as I look back. I don't recall anything. I'm sure there was certain mischievous things. I remember you've heard the remark about an outhouse, haven't you?
Yes.
And that was common for kids, you know, to tumble over an outhouse.
With somebody in it, or?
And if you could get there, there was somebody in there.
That's funny. Your family's main transportation while you lived at home was
My family's main transport was horse and carriage, horse and cars,
Uh-huh.
horse and long cars to haul food, haul barrels on,
Mm-hmm.
and a carriage when you could afford a trip to St. John's,
Mm-hmm.
a little special, and that was a long trip. It was almost 17 miles
Mm-hmm.
to St. John's, which was the principal city.
Mm-hmm.
We had stores in the seacoast town where I was born, but when we wanted the real McCoy, so to speak, we had to go to St. John's.
So Pooch Cove is the seacoast town that you
That was the name of the town
and
where we
St.
lived.
John's is the city.
St. John's was the principal city, approximately 16 to 17 miles.
Uh-huh. When you were growing up, did you have family reunions with any of the other family members that lived in Newfoundland, or?
Yes, you mean relatives?
Yes, uh-huh.
Oh yes, yes. There was always an occasion to have birthday parties.
They were probably pretty big get-togethers, weren't they?
Not
With as big as the families?
Well, we had not too big because, for instance, the Shays, all of the Shays in the seacoast town where I was born were related.
Mm-hmm.
The original John Shay, who settled the town of Pooch Cove, was my great-grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I never knew him. I never knew my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
That was my father's father.
Yes.
Now, see, and it gets down to me, I'm a fourth generation. But every Shay in that seacoast town were related, were
all
related.
relatives. Uh-huh. Did your uncles, did they have families with as many children, or?
Some of them did, some did, and some didn't.
Uh-huh.
All had families, all had children. There was no such thing, it was very seldom you see a man and a woman living together without children.
Mm-hmm.
They'd all have children.
Mm-hmm.
How they managed was beyond my comprehension, the more I think about it. But they managed,
Mm-hmm.
with no doctors, They gave birth in a home.
In a home?
There was no hospital.
Mhm. How close were your nearest neighbors from your
Oh,
homes?
within shooting distance.
Okay, so they were fairly
Oh yeah, within walking distance.
within walking distance. Yes.
Less than a quarter mile.
Uh-huh. Did you have a lot of childhood friends in your town of Puchco?
Yes, all we could handle, all we could
Yeah.
take care of.
Do you have a particular best friend that you remember from
Yes.
your, what was his name?
Robert Malloy.
Uh-huh.
Robert Malloy and I were in boarding school together. We were the only two in the seacoast town where I was born that had a grant from the government to go away to a boarding school. We were the only two in the entire city of 1,000 population.
Mm-hmm.
And we were fast friends as boyhood. And when he left to come to the United States, I did too. He went to Boston, I went to New York,
Uh-huh.
and we retained our friendship and visited back and forth.
Uh-huh.
He had a son came to see me in Dallas, Texas,
Really?
when he was in the Army during
Uh-huh.
World War II.
Uh-huh. And how long?
He passed away just about a year ago.
Just about a year ago. So he lived a very long life.
He
too.
lived to be 91 or, I think, wait a minute, over a year. He's been dead over a year. I'm 92. He was 91 when he died.
When was the last time you had contact?
We kept in touch with each other by phone once or twice a year.
A year, yeah.
And we wrote all the time. And I went to see him on several occasions
Uh-huh.
because I was making trips back to Newfoundland, and I would go to Boston first, or go to New York and take a boat to Newfoundland.
Yes. Did you, growing up, did you have any musical talents, or did you?
Yes, typical country kids would try to sing.
Uh-huh. No instruments?
No
or
instruments.
Did any of your brothers or sisters play instruments, or?
We didn't
Have the time.
We didn't have any.
Yeah.
We couldn't afford instruments.
Or the time, probably.
That's right.
Okay. What was your first house or apartment like when you came to the United States? Or what year was it that you came to New York?
1923.
Uh-huh.
I was 18 years old.
18 years old, and you came into.
I came by rail all the way across Newfoundland,
Uh-huh.
narrow gauge, a boat across the Gulf of St. Lawrence to Sydney, Nova Scotia, and a train from Sydney, Nova Scotia to Grand Central Station.
Mm-hmm.
And from Grand Central Station to Brooklyn, where I got a room in an area. I went there because my brother had been there,
Uh-huh.
but he was away. But I knew of the location through him on letters he wrote,
Yes.
and the address where I could go to,
Uh-huh.
which was no problem.
And it was a boarding.
No,
Or-
it was just a room in a room the large brownstone houses in that area had rooms for rent.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe $3 or $4 a week, something like that.
Uh-huh.
And there were nice, clean bedrooms with bathroom facilities, not a private bath,
Mm-hmm.
but one on the floor you were sleeping on.
Mm-hmm. Did you? What was your first job when you came to New York?
I got a job immediately. I answered an ad. When I got in New York, let's say tonight or today, late in the evening, I got a room, and this lady wanted to answer some questions. I couldn't pay her because I didn't have any American money. So the next morning I went to the bank, and what little Newfoundland money I had, we had our own money at that time, I got my little bit of money changed and came back and paid her $4.
Mm-hmm.
Then the first question she asked me was, what are you going to do? I told her I was going to get a newspaper and go answer ads to get a job.
Mm-hmm.
She said, well, what about breakfast? And I said, well, I'll stop and go to a restaurant. She said, I'm going to give you breakfast. So she fed me for the first time, and the only time,
Uh-huh.
breakfast. I got a newspaper. As I look back, now I remember distinctly, I paid 2 cents for a newspaper, and I answered an ad with American Express Company that impressed me, hauling moving baggage
Mm-hmm.
at Pennsylvania Railroad Station.
Mm-hmm.
That was the ad. So I answered the ad and went there. When I got there was a lineup of men applying for the same job. And I got in line and stayed in line until late that afternoon. When I got to the end of the line, this man was sitting up at a desk in front of him, like, where he was sitting behind it, and he was making notes of everybody. He was taking, in other words, he was taking applications, if that's the correct word. And when it got to me, he said, how old are you? I told him. He said, are you an American? I said, no, sir, I'm not. He said, how long have you lived in the United States? And I said, one night. And he smiled, and he said, do you have any references? Yes, I said, I had two references. They were both from the school teachers in St. Bonaventure's. And I gave him those two letters, and he glanced at them for a minute. And he said, would you like to go to work tonight? I was shocked because all these other people had been there ahead of me. I said, I'd be glad to go to work. But he said, you haven't got any coveralls. And I said, well, I'll work in these clothes. So I went, he took me back to the back end of someplace and introduced me to a foreman who gave me a set of coveralls, loaned me a pair of coveralls. So I started jerking boxes out of a train and putting it in sections that would go to Toledo, Ohio, or Kalamazoo, Michigan, or what have you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway, and that night I worked until 12 o'clock. And this man came on, the foreman came on duty, and he said, how long have you been here? And I said, well, I was hired this evening at such and such a time. I said, I don't know exactly what hour it was. And he said, have you had any supper? I said, no, I haven't. He said, would you like to keep on working? And I said, well, I'd be tickled to death to, but I would like to eat something. So I went around the corner, he directed me, and I got a sandwich or two, came back, and I worked till daylight.
Wow.
That was my first night in the United States.
Then, did you have a regular schedule after that?
After that, I had a regular schedule, but
A lot of hours, though, I bet.
Oh, they paid by the hour. You could work, if you wanted to, you could put in 2 shifts. But then there were 8 or 9 hours.
Yeah.
And when the shift was over, you were through. Somebody else came on duty, except once in a while when they were short-handed. I'd only stay there a few weeks.
What was the first meal you cooked in your apartment or your room?
I never did cook.
You never prepared a meal?
I had no place to prepare.
No, okay, because it was just a room. It was just a bedroom.
Just a bedroom.
And then from your next job that you had, what?
The reason I left American Express, I can remember this very vividly. I learned about the chain stores, hiring people and paying them a little bit more money than I was making at juggling boxes and baggages. And I went to the foreman one day and I said, I would like to take off, if it's convenient, tomorrow, not come to work. I want to apply for a job in a chain store. He said, where? I told him. He said, I think it's a good idea. He said, I think you'd make a pretty good salesman. He encouraged me. I thanked him, and I applied for a job, and I was hired immediately.
What store was it?
Sheffield Farms Company, a chain store. And I was with them 4 years. I started out as a busboy, so to speak. Then I became a top salesman in the store, and later became manager of one of their stores.
Manager.
In 1 year.
In 1 year. Where did you move from the room in New York, in Brooklyn?
Oh yes, naturally. I moved to another room, another home, near the store where I was working.
And you would walk to work?
Oh, I didn't have. I got a room within a block or two from where the store was.
And then from that job, after 4 years, you became you were a manager, and then
I became a manager 1 year.
I mean, within 1 year, and then you worked it for 3 more years.
I stayed there for 3 more years. 1900. I started to work. I was 19 years old, I believe, when I became a manager. 1 year, and I was there 3 years. And then I got a job traveling, a sales job traveling, and that brought me across the United States. And I ended up in Oklahoma on a visit one time as
on a sales call, and
well, no, one of the company I was associated with had an assignment in Tulsa and sent me there to check it out.
Mhm.
And I fell in love with Tulsa and resigned my job and remained in Oklahoma.
uh-huh.
Went to work for Frigidaire Corporation.
And what age were you then?
I was 23, I believe.
23. Uh-huh.
Mhm.
And when was
Now, wait a
the-
minute, wait a minute. I came to the United States in 1923. I was 18. And then, let's say 5 years, 18, how old was I?
You'd be
That's it.
1928.
25, 8 from,
You were 23, and then 5 years from there, so that would put it. I mean, you came in 1923.
I came in
And this
1920,
is 5 years later, so it would be 1928.
28.
And-
That's right, 23.
And you were 23 years old in
That's right,
1928.
that's about right, yes,
Mhm.
that's correct.
When did you first learn how to drive a car?
I learned how to drive a car in New York,
In New York?
yes.
Where? How old were you?
I was 19 or 20, I guess.
And who taught you how to drive?
Oh, some young man that became a buddy of mine
Uh-huh.
taught me how to drive.
And what type of car did you learn? in?
Why, heck, I was, oh man, I was making money.
Uh-huh.
I was making, back in those days, $150 a month was a lot of money.
Yes.
There were no taxes
Mm-hmm.
and no deductions,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to buy a car.
What was your first car that you bought?
I bought a Nash.
Uh-huh. And what year was it?
Oh, golly.
Did you buy it new, or was it a...
No, it was a nice little used car.
Uh-huh.
At least it looked good to me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think what year it would be. About 2 years after I lived in the United States, I guess.
So maybe 19...
I went to work for Sheffield immediately, and within a year I was a manager, and I guess it was 2 years later,
Mm-hmm.
I became a big shot. I had a car.
Were the streets all paved in New York?
Oh yes, at
were
that
they
time.
the brick paved
I
streets, or
don't-
were they...
There was concrete,
There was concrete? Uh-huh.
some of them, most of them,
Most of them.
depending on the area.
Mm-hmm.
The older part of the cities, there were brick, or what do you call it,
Cobblestone?
cobblestone, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But this particular area that I lived in, Flatbush, it was, I would say, upper type of area.
Mm-hmm.
It was not. It bordered on, let's say, the people who could afford to pay rent and own homes, other than living in an apartment.
Yes. Yes. What is your most treasured possession, and why?
My most treasured possession.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd have to do some thinking about that. I guess my most treasured possession would be my wife and family,
Mm-hmm.
and still is.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I only had the one wife.
And you met Nana in Tulsa, Oklahoma?
met her in Tulsa.
What was she doing in
She was
Tulsa?
a teacher,
She was a teacher.
yes.
Was her family from Tulsa?
No, her family was from Missouri,
Missouri.
Maryville, Missouri.
And at what you met her that first year?
I
you were
met
there?
her. I met her shortly after I moved to Tulsa,
Uh-huh.
through a friend, to a lady that I met in a dry goods store. Introduced me to Nina.
And how long did you all date? Or,
Well,
or courtship is?
Yeah, yes, I can tell you exactly. I met her in, I think, in about September or October of 1928,
Mm-hmm.
and we became engaged almost within 60 days.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went to visit her family at Christmas time. She was teaching, and she said, if you'd like to, we'd go up and meet my mother and my sisters. her father, naturally, he was an invalid, which I did, and their family were marvelous. We became, I guess, they liked me and I liked them. It was a very pleasant occasion.
Mm-hmm.
Then we planned marriage when in the summertime when she quit teaching, which is what we did.
Well, when she was teaching in
She-
Tulsa, she was there by herself,
Oh yes, she had
By
an
herself,
apartment. She had an apartment with another.
and then she would go home in the summers.
Go home in the summer, yes,
Mhm.
and go home for Christmas,
Uh-huh.
which we did. I went home with her at Christmas time the first time, and I didn't remain there. I just remained there for a few days or something like that.
That was back in 28. That was a pretty big step for a single woman to go live and teach by themselves. Was that
That was
normal?
that was very normal.
Oh, it was. Okay.
Oh yes, yes. Nina had friends who had she had been in school with, in college with.
Mhm.
One went to Idaho,
Mm-hmm.
and I think Nina went to South Bend for a short time and taught,
Mm-hmm.
but she didn't like it. And but
What type of teaching did she?
She taught art.
Art. Where did she go to school at?
Kevin, I don't remember.
Somewhere in Missouri, maybe.
I do Chicago University.
Uh huh.
I do remember that part of it only.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember any other schools.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure she went through the common schools like we all
Yeah.
in Missouri where she lived.
Mm-hmm. But okay, so then you came back, you met her family, and then how soon did you all marry?
Following July.
The following July.
Yeah, when
So,
she taught school and then went home.
uh-huh.
She finished school in June, went home, and we had planned to get married at her home in Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
You see, she was not Catholic, and we had arranged for a priest to come to the home.
Mm-hmm.
The parents, they were not against the marriage, but they were not exactly heft on going to a church.
Yes.
So they'd rather have the priest come to the house,
Mm-hmm.
which was all right.
Mm-hmm.
There was no such thing as splurging weddings back in those days. Things were a little bit calmer, and,
Yeah.
and first of all, we couldn't afford it.
Uh-huh. But then you settled down in Tulsa for how many years?
Several years.
Several years, and
Then
you
we
worked
moved-
for Frigidaire the whole time?
Always with Frigidaire.
Mm-hmm.
Different jobs. I started out as a salesman, a retail salesman. Then I developed into a wholesale salesman, and then I developed into becoming a partner in the distributing of Frigidaire.
Mm-hmm.
And I remained in Oklahoma until after the war, during the war period. We moved from Tulsa to Oklahoma City. I think you have that, don't you?
Uh-huh.
And then I was there when Pearl Harbor hit. When did Pearl Harbor? No, December 40. How good is your memory?
Was it 42 or 41?
December 41.
December 41.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to work for the government. I worked for the United States government for 2.5 years.
Uh-huh. What did you do with them?
Well, I did a little bit of everything. I was in the War Production Board, and I'd go to help expedite materials to build planes or tanks or guns.
Mm-hmm.
We closed up all of the big manufacturing companies like General Motors, quit making refrigerators,
Mhm.
and quit building automobiles, and they supplied the materials they had on hand to some other war plant to build planes and tanks and guns.
Mm-hmm.
The entire United States went completely out of the manufacturing of, shall I say, home goods
Mm-hmm.
to building machines of war.
Mm-hmm.
And I did my little bit. All I could do was to help.
Yes.
And then out of a clear blue sky, they put me in charge of rationing.
Mm-hmm.
And I became the rationing director for gasoline for Oklahoma,
Did you for the whole state?
for the whole state.
Wow. Uh-huh.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
then-
my picture was in the front page of the Dallas Morning News, the Oklahoma City Morning News. And when I came home, Nina says, "You better not go downtown." I said, "Why not?" She says, "Well, there's been more phone calls come to the house when they saw the story about you rationing gasoline in Oklahoma.
Were they threatening phone calls?
No,
or-
these were people kidding me, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's the Northern state, you know.
Yes.
The laugh was, why Oklahoma?
Uh-huh.
Why did they pick on me?
And Dad was born in Tulsa,
Your dad was born in Tulsa.
and then
And we moved. He was in Oklahoma City, and then moved to Dallas.
and you came to Dallas after World War II. What brought you to Dallas?
I got the contract for Bendix automatic washers to become a distributor. That's it.
So you set up your own distributorship in
Set-
Dallas.
Set up our own distributorship, Lone Star Wholesalers in Dallas.
What would be the most important thing that you would want want future generations to know?
Kevin,
That's
I
a
don't
hard
know.
one, too.
Go ahead.
That's a hard one too.
Yeah.
That's kind of a vague question.
Well, whatever. I don't know, Kevin. I have always had one ambition. I'm talking about myself. I was an entrepreneur. That's a good word.
It's a very good description.
I was determined to be successful, and I guess I was successful. I was very successful as managing a grocery store in New York, because I was invited to hold sales meetings at the main office on a couple of occasions, because they claimed I had done a better job of promoting the canned goods that they were trying to get sold, so to speak. I don't know whether you follow me or not. Assuming that they changed brands. It's a different story today. Today, you know, you walk into a grocery store and pick up a can of this and walk up and pay for it.
Yeah.
But here is a store where the people, you waited on everybody. No, you didn't. Nobody helped themselves.
You pulled the groceries for them.
You had, sure, pack it and deliver it and what have you. And if they changed brands, for instance, one particular case, we stopped Sunbeam canned goods, and then we went to Del Monte. And boy, the people just couldn't get, the customers didn't like it. They still wanted their old brands.
Yeah.
And how do you promote your new brands? Well, a lady helped me one day. She said, you know what I'd do if I were you? I was Jimmy then to a lot of people. She said, if I were you, Jimmy, I'd go over to the hardware store and get a big bowl, glass bowl. I'd open up 2 or 3 cans of those Del Monte peaches and put them in that bowl.
And let them sample them.
Let them sample them. How did you know that?
Yeah.
Did you ever hear that? Have I told you that?
No, I never did.
So anyway, I bought some little dishes, 4 or 5 little dishes, and a few spoons, and I put a couple of cans of peaches, and man, I'd sample them, and the people thought they were marvelous, you know. Hell, I cleaned out all the shelves in a hurry, and the company learned about it and had me come down to a sales meeting at the main office and tell how I did it. And I didn't do it. It wasn't me at all. It was one of my customers.
Well, that's ingenuity there.
Ingenuity, yes.
Yeah. I'm kind of backtrack a little bit. What are your earliest memories of church growing up when you were a child?
Church?
Of church.
Oh, gracious.
'Cause
very definite. I served Mass in that cold country when I was a boy, 6 years old. It was so cold on many occasions I could hardly handle the wine, what do you call it?
The chalice and the little plate that the...
I could hardly handle the one that the wine was in, the little...
Oh, the decanter?
Yeah, the little fruits.
Yeah.
The small ones.
Yes.
I helped build a fire in that chapel on many occasions when I was a youngster. That was truly cold country.
Did you all go to church just on Sundays?
We went to church on Sunday. I went to church. It looks like I was going all the time. But I served Mass when I was a boy, and my mother was so thrilled to get me to serve Mass, my father too, of course, that I went in the wintertime, I could almost froze to death walking that 1.5 miles to get to church.
Uh-huh. The church is always, through your entire life, church has been
all
very,
mine. Then
very, very important. One of the most important things in your life.
it was absolutely the most important thing.
Mhm.
See, when I went away to boarding school, St. Bonaventures, they were Irish Christian brothers. We went to Mass every morning in a group.
In what language did they do the Mass in?
Same Latin.
In Latin. It was always Latin.
Always Latin.
Uh-huh.
Everything was Latin until, naturally, it's like, I forget when they changed, but when they changed was different.
Yes.
But when I was a boy growing up, when I was a man, when I was married, it was all still Latin.
Still Latin, yes. Dad remembers some of it being
Why,
Latin.
sure your dad
Yes.
does,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Can you give me an oral history on your family, how the generations back that came over from Ireland?
Yes, I have one on my father's side. My great-grandfather John Shea was one of 4 brothers that built a schooner in Cork, Ireland,
Mm-hmm.
and
It
sailed.
was County Cork. Is that that was
That was it. That was
part of Ireland?
That's part of Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
That schooner that they built, they brought it across the Atlantic. They sailed it across the Atlantic.
How big a schooner would that have been?
I have no idea, Kevin.
Probably a pretty dangerous journey. To
Well,
get
it was
across.
a dangerous journey.
Yes.
They left Cork, Ireland, to go to Baltimore, Maryland,
Uh-huh.
where an older brother had gone previously.
How did he get there?
Well, I guess he went on a cattle boat or some other way.
Yeah.
There was no such thing as passenger ships.
Mm-hmm.
The 4 Irish did what they could do
Mm-hmm.
to the best of their ability, because Ireland was truly controlled by England.
Yes.
And anyway, to make a long
So
story
John Shea and his 3 brothers built.
John
the
Shea
schooner.
and his 3 brothers built a schooner. They sailed it across the Atlantic. They hit a violent storm right near where I was born,
Mhm.
Conception Bay. They were fortunate enough to get into land and remain there.
Mhm.
Now, I don't have the fine print because nobody kept records.
Mhm.
It took me years to find out as much as I now know
Yes.
from a great aunt
Mhm.
that told me a little bit.
Mhm.
Now, the John Shea who settled the town where I was born, one of his sons, also a John Shea, helped build the first Catholic church in the seacoast town where I was born.
Mhm.
I have a history of that and list of the people who contributed to building of that church. That was the very first Catholic church. There was no priest in that town for years.
Mhm.
It was English country,
Mhm.
and no priest. Anyway,
No, no. And then, so that was that would have been your grandfather, the son of the second John Shea would have been
the second John Shea would be my great-grandfather.
your great grandfather.
Yes.
And then he had
And
his son was.
no, not his son, his brothers.
Uh-huh.
One of his brothers was my grandfather.
One of his brothers. Okay.
Yes, the John Shea who settled, let's go back to the
Okay.
beginning. The original John Shea who settled there
Mhm.
had 5 sons and 2 daughters.
Okay.
And he had one son was named John.
Okay.
And that John Shea, see, I have a record of that church that was built there
Yes.
by John Shea. Your father saw that, by the
Mhm.
way, and a list of the people who contributed to building of that. It was a beautiful church. That was the only church that I knew, and that was the church that I grew up in.
You grew up in. Okay.
That was the church my family were all married, all Christian.
Mhm.
All of my brothers and sisters were Christian in that church.
Mhm.
And some of my brothers and sisters, some of my brothers served Mass. I don't know whether they did ahead of me. I can't recall Mike and Will ever serving Mass. But I know I served Mass.
Mhm.
And I remember the teacher who taught me Latin.
Mhm. And then, the John Shea, one of his brothers was your great grandfather.
One of his brothers was my grandfather.
Was your grandfather? Okay.
My father's father, yes.
Your father's father. Okay. All right.
I met, for instance, right here, look. there's a picture of one of the John Shay's children,
Uh-huh.
Rosanna.
Rosanna? Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Let's see. Do you remember, these are some firsts that you would have experienced. The first telephone,
Yes,
that would have been,
oh yes, that's it. I'm glad you brought that one up. The first telephone that I used a telephone in a pay station,
Mhm.
but the first telephone that I really could use, that I could call, not my own, but in the grocery store that I managed
in New York.
in New
City.
York.
Uh-huh.
And I still remember the telephone number.
Uh-huh. What is that?
Buckminster 5349. I really do.
Uh-huh.
I
Now,
that was
were you-
was 1924.
okay, back then, there was no way of phoning into Newfoundland, was there? Or was there?
I don't know. I imagine there could have been,
But
I never used a telephone to find out.
how long would it take for you to get letters from New York to Pooch Cove?
4 days.
8 to 4 days?
4 or 5 days.
That's pretty fast.
There were no planes.
Did it all by rail
Boat.
or boat?
Strictly by boat.
Strictly by boat.
4 days. I have gone back and forth to St. John's, Newfoundland. 2 days to Halifax and 2 days to St. John's.
Mhm.
4 days.
Mm-hmm.
There were freight and passenger boats.
What about your first television you ever saw?
Well, the first television I ever saw, of course, now I can't remember exact date. And
Do you remember what
I
city?
guess I was selling them.
Were you in Oklahoma by then, or?
No, not the first television, Kevin, was since I've been here in Dallas.
Mm-hmm. Oh, since you've been in Dallas.
I'm trying to think, we had television in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I don't remember what year. I just don't remember.
Yeah. And then radio.
Now radio, radio I remember distinctly.
Uh-huh.
Fibber McGee and Molly, the first serials, we couldn't wait to get home in the evening to hear a couple of those silly shows.
Mm-hmm. That's why when I look back, I'm just making sure it's still recording.
Is that been recorded, all this conversation?
Oh yes, yes. I want this for everybody, future generations, and my brothers and sisters,
Well,
and for everybody. What about your first car that you ever? What's the first time you ever saw a car or rode in a car?
first car I ever saw was back in Pooch Cove, Newfoundland, where I was born.
Now that was rare back there.
That
right?
was the first one that came into the seacoast town where I was born.
Mm-hmm.
It was a novelty.
Oh yes.
We chased that around. The youngsters did. That's right.
Yeah.
Heck, man, we couldn't wait to grab onto the end of it.
Uh-huh. And then your first ice box, was that in
The first ice box I ever saw was actually in New York.
Uh-huh.
But that was shortly thereafter I was selling them.
You were selling them.
Yeah.
That's right. That was your
That was
your
my
living.
business. Yes.
That's right.
And the reason go ahead.
I'm sorry. You go on.
The reason I became